Go.
Right. And so attendants have been let in.
Yes, they're coming in, they're hearing you.
All right, so welcome everyone to the Family Resource Center's Family Skills Session. And this month we are focusing on managing anxiety. My name is Anne-Marie Gray-Diaz. I'm a program facilitator at the Family Resource Center. And our main goal is supporting families in having the healthiest and happiest relationships they can with one another and leading ultimately happier and healthier lives together. I am happy to have Siobhan Nixon and Lynn Curry with us this evening. Siobhan Nixon is an associate psychologist with the Wellness Center. Wellness Center is a licensed health facility that has a team of clinical specialists that provide a range of programs and interventions, those including psychological, mental health, and behavioral interventions. And Lynn Curry is an inclusion facilitator with Inclusion Cayman. And Inclusion Cayman aims to ensure that individuals, families, and communities feel confident to advocate for the inclusion of all individuals, with a main focus of community life being education, recreation, and employment. So welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. And so I'm going to just start off with what a lot of people probably already have some inclination about, what anxiety really is. We're going to talk about the behaviors, causes and reinforcers, and some potential solutions, potential resources for parents as well. So I'll go ahead and start off, but ladies, feel free to jump in if there's anything specific you'd really like to highlight. But in a nutshell, anxiety really is a physiological response to stress, to some sort of apprehension or concern about a future event, or sometimes it's an environment, or it can even be a person, a conversation. And so we've all typically had an experience with anxiety ourselves. We've maybe been sitting, waiting for a job interview, and we're shaky, our heart is pounding, and we're thinking, boy, I hope I ace this. Or maybe we're getting down on ourselves and not having very nice thoughts. So we've all experienced some form of anxiety before, which is good coming from the parent standpoint, because we can kind of operate from that level of empathy when we're supporting our children. And so we know the signs and the symptoms, or we might have an idea of what that might be. So there might be heavy sweating, we're panting, or we're having heavy breathing. Potentially we're having difficulty focusing on anything other than what is giving us the anxiety or cueing the anxiety. We're having maybe tummy issues, all sorts of things that can occur. But typically we don't maybe recognize certain things that we don't associate with anxiety, which could be anger, right? So typically the fight or flight response can get triggered when we're anxious, and that can cause anger, or that can cause the display of anger or aggression. And so we might see that in our child and we're like, why are you angry? What's going on? And they might not even realize that it's actually because they're anxious about something that's about to happen at school, test that's coming up, and they, realize they've left their pencil, and all of a sudden it's the end of the world, and they're getting really angry about it. There's other things too. If your child or you are experiencing difficulty sleeping, that could be indicative of anxiety. The inability to focus, you're being avoidant of certain things or certain people. Over planning, it can be quite common, especially amongst adults, but our children potentially could be doing it as well. And when our children are defiant, that could be something to think about, and it could be a clue towards a situation that's causing them to feel anxious or helpless. So these are some clues for us as parents to kind of look out for and consider, is my child maybe experiencing anxiety right now? Oh, they're being really negative about something. Could that potentially be anxiety, and what's going on? So these are really useful clues as parents. So Siobhan, I thought we could start with you, and I wondered if you could share a little bit with us about the typical causes of anxiety and how some of those behaviors can get reinforced.
Sure. Before I go into that, can I just add to some stuff that you were saying?
Please do. Go ahead.
So I also wanted to just highlight that, while we're focusing on anxiety, also recognizing that it is a very normal and natural emotional response to have, just like fear is a normal and natural emotional response to have. Both emotions serve are essential for survival and help to motivate us to learn adaptive skills. It becomes problematic when that anxiety and that fear is persistent, it's excessive, and now it's starting to interfere with what would be normal functioning. So anxiety within itself, again, is not a bad thing. It's when we recognize that there's this persistence and excessiveness starting to occur. In terms of causes, there's a learning theory approach to it as one potential explanation, and that looks at the fact that fear can be developed and anxiety can be learned, right? And so we can develop fear and learn anxiety through like what we would call direct conditioning. So if we as the individual has experienced something like, abuse or bullying or a very stressful testing experience, we've come to now associate those experiences with that fear, that anxiety. We can also come to learn it through what we call vicarious learning. So if there is an individual in our environment that is modeling a particular sort of anxious behavior or response, that child or teen is picking up on that, right? And then the other thing is also the sort of information that we transfer to the child, right? So say, for example, if we tell the kid that the dark is something to be fearful of, that's going to condition that fear response, and the kid is going to start to fear the dark because we're communicating that it is something to fear, it is something to feel anxious about. And sometimes we use that as a corrective measure, but in the end we end up with an anxiety disorder budding when that wasn't what we wanted, right? Then there's cognitive factors that play a role. So children that tend to be anxious tend to perceive things. They tend to over exaggerate the threat and danger of something, and they also over attend more to threats and dangers. So the way in which we think about situations that we're involved in and we come to understand them, our beliefs, that can serve to maintain and cause an anxiety response. And then also there's biological, genetic, and familial causes. So, if there is a family member that has anxiety, then there's a hereditary component, and it's likely that the child will also develop an anxiety disorder. There's also some school of thought that, parenting style may play a role as well if the parent is overprotective or over controlling. And also there's neurological structural changes that can happen as well. So the amygdala, which is a component of the brain that's involved in our fight, flight, or freeze response, anxiety and stuff like that, that tends to be hypersensitive in children that are anxious. So those are some biological familial causes. And then when we look at, then there's also some risk factors to take into account, right? So there's child-related risk factors. So a child who may have a developmental problem or any sort of social challenges are more likely to be at risk for developing anxiety. If there's insecure attachment happening, along with them experiencing some sort of bereavement. When it comes to parental risk factors, again, if there's a history of anxiety disorders, and then that parenting style, and then and then anxious parenting as well, right? And then environmental factors, if the kid or teen is living in a dangerous neighborhood, right? Or they're coming from a low socioeconomic family. Those are all environmental factors that can increase that risk of developing an anxiety disorder. And then for reinforcers, I just have two that I'm highlighting. And one of the main things is avoidance, right? It's a wildly used coping tool when it comes to anxiety. And I like to tell clients that anxiety and avoidance are frenemies because in the short term, it's great. It reduces that anxiety, but long term, it only serves to maintain the anxiety and make it more intensified. So something that was, viewed as minimally dangerous is now going to be viewed as this big, dangerous, insurmountable problem that can't be overcome. So we typically want to embrace that anxiety provoking situation. And then another sort of reinforcer is safety behaviors. So, these can be like, when we're in social situations, we're using our phones to try to avoid attention coming to us, or we avoid giving direct eye contact, or a child constantly seeking reassurance, right? And again, while all of these things are to ease the anxiety that they're experiencing, in the long term, it only serves to maintain it and reinforce it. So those are all things to look out for and address.
Yeah, that is a lot of food for thought. We don't aim to, we don't aim to overwhelm any of our viewers or any of our parents, but it's great to have kind of a full breadth overview of potential causes, right? And reinforcers, because sometimes we don't know, or we get hyper focused as parents. Oh, it has to be this one thing that's happening and I just need to fix that one thing. But I love that you brought up avoidance, and that typically if I would recommend, if a parent is really supporting a child in not avoiding something and in easing, kind of supporting them to be confident bit by bit and take on that, they're potentially going to get much further with a solution, right?
Yeah.
And Lynn, I wonder if you could share a little bit about what you found in your position at Inclusion Cayman, and I know you work in the schools a lot. What have you found most useful for parents to be aware of when it comes to anxiety?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Some of the things that Siobhan said, I think were so great in that, I want to add on just a little bit in that I think that when we recognize that it's natural and that kids, similar to adults, we all have things that we will be anxious about. I think it's really important to recognize that that will happen. But I think it's also important for parents to recognize when maybe they need some support and strategies to help their child with their anxiety, right? Because there's a lot of things that parents can do themselves. And I will share some of those strategies that are just, basic strategies that they can use to support their son or daughter to, move past these anxious feelings and thoughts. But at some point, some individuals might need to look at professional support to help with these things. So I think that Siobhan might elaborate maybe on that a little bit later.
We will. We'll get into that.
For sure. But I think one thing regarding parents is, sometimes we don't realize that we have our own anxiety and our child has anxiety, and we have to really kind of think about what's actually ours and what's actually the child's. Because sometimes a lot of anxiety that a parent may have might be placed on a child, and it might not actually be there. It's more of the parent's anxiety, right? Parents can be really apprehensive about some things. And I think that when they have a fear themselves about a child, maybe engaging in activity, or some, they feel fearful because of previous experiences, which is all completely natural. Kids can really feel that, right? They know when you're feeling a little bit off or anxious, or, they know when something's not okay with their mommy or daddy. So I think first, for parents to recognize what actually is theirs, to really identify what are my fears and what are my anxieties, to then better understand what their child's anxieties might be. I think there's some things that we can avoid, such as, why do you feel that way? Because sometimes kids don't always know why they feel that way. They might not always be able to label that.
Yeah. Why is a hard question. Why
is a hard question, but also, we have to think about what's age appropriate for kids and how they share. Sometimes, you mentioned the feeling of nausea, but sometimes it's like, well, I have butterflies in my stomach, right? It's like, I have this feeling of butterflies in my stomach. And I know I might still communicate that to others is, I'm feeling really anxious, I know, because I have butterflies in my stomach. So kids can communicate these things in different ways, but I think specifically asking why kids might feel that way, they might not always be able to answer and share why. It's like, well, I just have this feeling, because sometimes we're not able to explain our anxiety. I think also, phrases like, do it right now, or just get over it, phrases that push individuals into doing things that they don't want to do, but also aren't really prepared for, and are ready to do, can be a really traumatizing experience. Like Siobhan said, I also have purposely avoiding situations that cause anxiety. We know that causes things to be more fearful, but also fully submersing individuals into situations that can cause significant amounts of anxiety. We have to be really careful on how we navigate this, but also when we know what is a trigger for our child, right? Triggers are really important, and parents are the experts in this. They know what will be a trigger for their son or daughter. Yeah. When parents are really aware of that, they're able to better prepare themselves and better prepare the child for when they step into an environment or meet a friend. So I think that some of the strategies that I can share is, having a lot of patience and, establishing a really positive, accepting, and low pressure environment, being really positive and not kind of pressuring any kid to do something that they don't want to do. Obviously, that comes with strategies, right? And getting them to do certain things. Maybe it's going for a bath, right? Kids need to have baths. So it'll take some supports and strategies to get them to have a bath. But, a low pressure environment, it's like, okay, well, we're just going to put the water on your hand first. Let's just try this one part. It's just slow introductions into different things to reduce that anxiety level. Also rewarding successful steps. So, when you see that your child is really, really trying and that they're super anxious about things, rewarding them for that, I think, is super important, and letting them know that everything's going really well and you're super proud of them. You can do some role play to prepare with your child. You can also, redirect children in situations. If something is happening that maybe they'll be really anxious about, maybe turn their focus to something else that will help reduce that anxiety. Maybe some relaxation and breathing and meditation will be super helpful for some children. Maybe you could have a worry box at home where a child, if they're, however they want to communicate that, whether it's drawing or writing, whatever that may be, a worry box where they can put in some of their worries, and, we can take them out and we can talk about it and why, about this worry and how we can not have this be a worry anymore. But also discrete reminders to use some of those strategies. So, we might have these conversations at home, and then we go out, and then, a kid might have a really anxious feeling or anxious time. Having those soft reminders for kids when they're going through it, because they're not going to be able to remember every step that we talked about at home, right? They're going to need that support along the way. And, listening. Right? It's just listening and hearing them out, and giving them an opportunity to share, and also validating those feelings. Because I think that so often it's like, oh, well, that's not really something that's scary, or that's not, that's no big deal. They feel this way. And I think validating their feelings can go a long way. yeah, so there's just a couple strategies I wanted to share.
That's a lot. Thank you so much, Lynn. That's so helpful. And of course, if parents want to, understand, okay, how do I really do this in practice, and how do I specifically help my child, and you want individual support, you can reach out to any one of our agencies. So the Family Resource Center, Inclusion Cayman, or the Wellness Center. And we'll talk a little bit as we go as well about the different things that each agency can offer, okay? So I thought it was great, and I'm going to highlight a little bit on 3 main points that Lynn did touch on already. And so Lynn talked about the awareness that the parent must have, and we must be able to kind of separate our own anxieties from our child. And I've been guilty of that. I've been thinking, oh my goodness, my little boy is going to be so worried about starting school, and I did all these things to prepare and support him. And in the end, he, everything was fine. He was happy to go back. And so it was clearly all in my head, me working myself up, right? And so that's really important to think about. Is it really you, or is it your child, right? And within that separation, or in addition to the separation, it's thinking about how do you handle anxiety or any difficult emotion, especially in front of your child. Even the way you talk about it to your partner, your husband, your wife, how are you communicating about things? Oh, I'm really worried about this. What am I going to do? And sounding desperate and things like this. Our children really need a sense of kind of safety and security. And when they can see their mom, their dad role model, that they're confident and they can stay in control of what's going on, that's going to give them a sense of confidence and safety that they can potentially handle their own issues as well. Because we might, and that's the thing, we might not be able to control our children. The only people we can really control is ourselves. However, we do have the largest margin of influence in our children's lives. And the biggest part really does come from role modeling. So, in the moment, if you're feeling really tense, really anxious, it's not that you don't want to share that or show that to your child. You want to share and show that you can handle those. So we're not saying hide anxiety, hide your emotions, absolutely not, but actually show that you can handle it in any given moment. So you can even kind of, like Lynn said, with role play, you can even kind of narrate what you're doing. Oh, mommy's feeling so anxious, feeling so frustrated. Oh, I need to take some deep breaths. But you can really exaggerate it, and it's fine, because you're using it also as an opportunity to role model for your child, right? Oh, those deep breaths really helped me, be really exaggerative with it. I wonder, I need to think better, because right now I'm just thinking about all my worries. I wonder what I can think right now that's going to help me. And even include your child in the conversation. Mommy's struggling. What do you think is something mommy needs to think right now to help me to feel calm right now? And you might be amazed at some of the things your children will come out with. I've been so amazed by something just my 3-year-old is able to tell me. They can come out with some profound things. And those opportunities are great, because then we can kind of say, oh, you look like you're feeling worried or you're feeling anxious. Do you remember what you told mommy the other day when I was feeling that way? And we can kind of remind them, and they can have this like light bulb moment, like, oh, wait a minute. Yes, I can control how I feel, and I can manage my feelings. I help mommy do it, so I can do it too. So be a role model, even in that moment of parenting when you're maybe frustrated with your child's behavior. Do your best to stay calm and parent from a place of control. It's so important, because we make better parenting decisions when we parent from that place rather than a place of frustration or anger or anxiety, right? And just like Lynn said, yes, validate their feelings. It's incredible. And I think Siobhan could even speak to the science and the way the brain works when it comes to validation, and how that really can de-escalate the intensity of a particular emotion, right? Just having someone say, and I'm sure we've all kind of felt it, a friend or our own parents kind of say, you know, I get it. It's really hard going through this. It's really a tough thing. And that immediately kind of makes us feel a sense of relief. It de-escalates the actual emotion we're experiencing. And so something as simple as validation can go a long way, especially when kind of managing the emotion in that moment, right? The third thing is to remember that your child can cope. I think we get so caught up in trying to essentially save our child, and that has a backfiring effect, right? When we're really not saving them, essentially, we're protecting them from an opportunity where they could really build their resilience, build those skills, and learn and build that confidence that they do have the ability to bounce back, that failure is okay, that having anxiety is okay. And so it's important to reassure ourselves as parents that if I can handle anxiety, I handled anxiety when I was a child, my child is going to handle it and they're going to be okay. Even if they struggle, they might learn an amazing skill along the way. So that's important to really empower our children with that confidence when we're reassured of their own ability. And so these three aren't just coming out of my head, by the way. This is coming from Eli Lebowitz, I want to say, or Leibowitz. He was in a recent interview, and he was talking about three main kind of top recommendations he would make for parents. And Eli is, I would want to say, the main founder of an alternative form of treatment for anxiety. So for a long time, the main treatment was CBT, which stands for cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And so now there's an alternative form, which is called SPACE, which really focuses on supporting the parent or teaching the parent new strategies and new skills to support their child that has anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to hear a little bit more about that from Siobhan. I want to say closer to the end, actually, I'm going to come back to you, Siobhan, about it. So she can share a little bit about that, including strategies from that specific form of treatment.
No worries.
And so let's talk about our thoughts, really. Our thoughts, and feel free, Lynn and Siobhan, to jump in at any point. But our thoughts really shape our reality. They really are everything. And they're so important that they can impact our emotions and they can impact our behaviors, just as our emotions and our behaviors can impact one another. And so essentially, if we think that this is the end of the world, our life is over, and we're coming up with these sort of statements, which we might have heard from our children, especially teenagers, they can go into that really tough place, right? And so if we think that way, then it is that way, right? Because our thoughts, that's our perspective, that forges our reality. But if we think this isn't the end of the world, this is manageable, and I can do this, then that's what our reality is. And so parents can have such a great impact with their children when we have that awareness of catching those thoughts and those statements from our kids, you know, when they're saying really self-defeating things or really anxiety-provoking statements. We can kind of catch that and say, well, hold on a second, you know, is there another way to think about this? Is there a more helpful way to think about this? Because you thinking that isn't helping you out right now, and it's going to make your problem bigger. So let's think about how, you know, a different way of thinking about this. Let's talk about it. And so you don't need to feed your children the answers. You don't need to feed them the new thoughts. And actually, it's better to get them to come up with the new thought, because that is shaping their reality. So it's important that they start to challenge their own thoughts with your support until gradually they've challenged it to a point where they're now thinking differently about the particular situation, right? Or anxiety itself. You know, and we can start to do this as parents too with our thoughts. I mean, if our thought about the anxiety itself and our child, if we're kind of feeling, Ooh, this is a helpless situation. I don't think I can help my child with their anxiety. That's what we're going to think, and that's going to be our reality. But if we start to challenge that and say, and most of us that are here tonight will likely be feeling hopeful, right? That's why you're here, and curious about certain strategies and skills. Just right here, just challenging your thoughts, challenging your children's thoughts. Something as simple in theory, but in practice, it takes time, and it takes a lot of practice to get there. I don't know if Lynn or Siobhan want to jump in.
I just wanted to, you've been reading my mind, Anne-Marie. I wanted to highlight that, it's the triple P's, practice, 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 right? So sort of realizing we have core beliefs, right, that, are shaped by a lot of our experiences. And so a lot of the thoughts that we have come from those core beliefs. So if you look at the core beliefs as being like the foundation of a building, if that's an anxious core belief, anything that is put on top of that foundation is also going to reflect anxiousness, right? So it took time for that core belief to be cemented. It's going to take time for it to undo. And so with practice, 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 you're helping that child to attend less to those dangers, to those threats, and being able to expand on the viewpoints that they have to help manage that anxiety.
I love it. That's a wonderful analogy and way to think about it. We got to go to the foundation of everything, right? And I guess when we think about, like, we're constantly wondering the why behind our anxiety, we need to maybe just focus more on the core beliefs, what's going on there.
And I think sometimes we might not always know the why. But it's just, how do we manage sometimes, in therapy, we're managing symptoms, because sometimes we might not always get to know the why behind something. And just to piggyback off of what yourself and Lynn said earlier, and I liked the idea of the worry box and then both of you highlighting this notion of problem solving, right? So I want to highlight again, worry is adaptive. It is that cognitive component to anxiety, right? So it's those thoughts and images about, future negative threats and outcomes. But the problem is we get caught in a loop and we get into a cycle, and then all we do is worry, 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 thinking of, like a hamster on a wheel, it's just running in a little circle, and the hamster never remembers to jump off of the wheel, which means we don't remember to jump to problem solving, right? So when we identify what it is that we're worrying about, okay, great, well, how do I problem solve this? And we're not looking for the perfect solution. We are looking for a good enough solution, because if we find that we are on, solution 10 for one problem, now you're looking for the perfect solution, right? But if you can find one or two solutions, you're golden, because it's also being comfortable with imperfection.
Yeah, and I think just kind of adding on to what was already said, but thinking specifically about how, obviously, for parents who might notice kind of anxiety in their kids, or notice that they're having their own thoughts and having a really hard time on challenging those thoughts, I think that it's really important to talk about how we sometimes need support ourselves, right? So we are always looking for supports and strategies for kids, and we want our kids to be successful, but if we don't have that ourselves, that can kind of put us in a sticky situation. So kind of adding on to what Siobhan is saying is trying to find a solution. We don't have to do that on our own, right? We can look at resources and people in the community to help us to get there.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Lynn. So let's take a look at our responses as parents, how we might respond to an anxious child. And so we talked a little bit about us being accommodating, and to the point where we're taking our child away from the situation so they can feel better, and we're essentially saving them. But we've kind of talked about the fact that has the adverse effect, right? But let's talk about the other side of the spectrum, when we're at a point where we're no longer interested in saving our child. We're just frustrated at this point, right? Because that can happen. So let's say our child they're getting upset. they're saying, I don't want to go to school. We don't know the reason behind that, right? But that's what they're saying. That's what they're getting upset about. Now, if we look at kind of this triangle of how our thoughts and our emotions and our behaviors can all inform one another, if we let our frustration and our kind of frustration over this kind of, maybe we've heard this a lot of times and we're just frustrated, we're past the point of no resolve, and we let that frustration stay in the driver's seat and keep control of us, our thoughts and our behaviors are potentially not going to be super effective, right? We're going to potentially be thinking, oh my gosh, I'm over this, I'm done. And our behavior is going to then be something along the lines where we're yelling back, we're saying, you just got to get over this, I'm done with this, right? And our response is so important because we essentially impact the outcome of the situation, right? Event plus response equals outcome. We only have control over our response, the way we respond to our child. And that has an incredible influence into the outcome. So if we're yelling back now, we might have even been here, we maybe know exactly what's going to happen. Our child is going to start getting more upset, tears are going to happen, and it's going to potentially explode and get bigger, right? We know it, we've probably been there before. I have myself, right? And so if we, in that moment, can recognize our emotions, recognize our frustrations, and take a moment to not let that take control, not stay in the driver's seat, but kind of put that over to the passenger side, take a few deep breaths to collect ourselves and come up with some more helpful thoughts, or challenge those thoughts of, I'm over this, I'm done with this, and challenge those thoughts to say, I can't keep kind of having this cycle with my child. I need to come up with something better. I need to stay calm and figure out what's going to potentially help my child, right? And figure out some solutions to my problem. So those kinds of ways of thinking are going to impact us to come up with a better behaviors, better actions. So we're more likely to reassure our child, you know what, I know it is hard sometimes, but I'm going to walk you into class. And that's kind of an implicit boundary too. We're basically saying, yeah, you're going into school, but we're being supportive and we're saying, I'm going to walk you in, and everything's going to be okay. So we can reassure, we can support in that way. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lynn or Siobhan, if you think, I don't know about that. But we can be supportive without kind of letting them get their way. And boundary setting, I would say, is one of the best ways of doing that. It's important we set limits, that there are expectations, just leaving and not going to school can never be an option, right? I don't know if anyone wants to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and kind of add in, that if this is kind of a one-off thing of, I really don't want to go to school today, then, you can kind of appreciate, well, we have to go to school. But I think that if a child is consistently showing that maybe they don't want to go to school, we have to really think about the why. And although the child might not be able to communicate the why, we have to kind of try and figure it out and check in with the teacher and check in with the school and say, my child has been really upset about coming to school. Has anything been happening that I need to be aware of? Maybe there's a child who, maybe their friendship, their best friend and them had a fight, or maybe there's something else going on, or maybe there's a really challenging subject that they're learning that, a child's having a really hard time with. So I think that identifying the why is so important, because otherwise, we can consistently say, well, I'm going to support you, I'm going to take you to your classroom, or I'll bring you lunch, or all these things, but actually not getting to the root cause then means that, we're not actually helping to solve the problem, like
the bigger picture
focused, right? The bigger picture. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm going to actually, with you saying that, Lynn, I'm going to skip ahead and I'll come back to the other slide. Let's talk about that. Yeah, school, we need to kind of be allies with our child's teacher, their counselor, things like that, because we want to feel like we can talk to them when it's situations like that. Like, I don't want to go to school. Okay, you've been saying this a lot this week. What's going on? They maybe they do know why, but they don't want to tell us. So that could be another thing too. So can you share a little bit with us how best for a parent to advocate for their child or just to get information, especially if they've maybe had history where parent and teacher have gotten off to a bad start, maybe even. What could parents do?
I think that, for parents, something I always talk to parents about is it can be really challenging because ultimately parents' experiences are really valuable, but also parents know their child best, right? And I think that sometimes when it comes to having conversations with schools, there can be a feeling of almost a power imbalance in that the parents feel that they don't really have a voice or they don't really have a say in what is happening. So I think taking an approach which is really collaborative and willing to work with the teachers and to sit down and have an open and honest discussion can be really important. But also, reflecting on what you just mentioned about when things have gotten off on the wrong foot, there's always opportunities to repair those relationships, right? And sometimes it takes a bit of time, but you can always work towards a lens that is solution based. And I think that always keeping that in mind of, we can talk all day about what the challenge is or what the problem is. We can spend a whole lot of time talking about it. But I think recognizing the value of having the teacher, the value of having the parent, and focusing on the solution. So what's the solution here? So for example, say you have a child and they're having a lot of anxiety at home about something specific. Let's say it's math. I mean, I'm reflecting on my own personal experiences here because, oh my gosh, I have so much anxiety about doing math problems. When you have a child going to school where they're going to do math, having that collaborative approach with the teachers of saying, I've noticed this is really challenging. They have a lot of anxiety about doing their math problems. Here are some things that have really worked at home. Or, I've noticed this. What have you been doing in the classroom to support this? So having a really collaborative approach rather than, although parents know their child best is, that can really fracture a relationship when you're standing there saying, no, you need to do this and you need to do that. Having a open collaborative relationship can go a long way, and having that open dialogue. And I think that in school as well, sharing, my child had a really rough night, they were up all night, having that open dialogue of what's happening at home too can really help inform the teachers on how they can best support the child in the classroom. And I think that something for parents that can be really hard is that it's very emotional because it's your baby and you're mama or daddy and you are really protective of your child. So I think sometimes our emotions can get in the way of clear and effective communication, right? So trying to manage those emotions, although we can say that, we know it's really hard, and that's a whole other topic in itself, right?
Yes.
Having that approach of, okay, so I feel that I'm getting really emotional right now. Let me just take a second so I can take a step back, because we need to focus on the solution, and we're focusing on the child here, and what's going to help them be successful is really kind of the best approach.
That's wonderful. So kind of managing our emotions and our feelings in the moment with the teacher or the staff member as well, aiming at becoming partners and kind of having this almost three-way collaboration, parent, child, and teacher or counselor, depending on the meeting or the conversation.
Absolutely.
That's great.
And feel free to add anything in, anyone kind of,
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to open. Yeah, go ahead, Siobhan.
Well, I just wanted to add that, when we're talking about the persistence of things, it is very important if it's a one-off thing, kids avoiding something, that's fine. Because remembering that fear and anxiety is very transient, right? And so again, we're not everything is a disorder, right? So a kid could have transient fears and anxiety, and as a clinician, we look at, is it developmentally appropriate, right? So, a 1 or 2 year old is going to have some separation anxiety, and that's normal at that age, right? But if we get a 13-year-old or 17-year-old having separation anxiety, then we know that's not developmentally
Right.
appropriate, right? And so if we do see that a kid is highly avoidant about something, then we do want to, in that, regard, try to understand the why behind it, because it's in your face, something is wrong. And so we want to be able to understand in that capacity.
That's great. Thank you for pointing that out. And I just wanted to go back, just because we were talking about parents and school. So I wanted to kind of focus on that while Lynn was on the topic. But just going back to a very simple strategy, this is best to do this when a child is not overly escalated. So maybe taking some time to deep breathe with them, or just holding them sometimes until they're ready to feel more calm. But this is called the worst case, best case, most likely situation or scenario. And you're really getting them to look at their anxiety if they are aware of what they're worried about. This is a good way to kind of talk about, okay, what's the worst case scenario? What's the worst thing that could happen? What's the best case? And then what's most likely? And if most likely is worst case, then that could potentially be a good opportunity to problem solve there. Okay, so you're probably going to be dealing with the worst case scenario. How are we going to do this? How can I support you? What are you going to do to get through this, right? And so it can even be, because a lot of times anxiety can come from a fear of failure. In adults and children, right? That's typically the biggest cause of it. So we can kind of start to help our children to form a healthy relationship with failure. Failure is the stepping stone to success, right? It's where we learn, it's where we improve. And so we don't get something right, we can start to figure out, oh, why didn't I get that right? Okay, let me think about this. Oh, this is what I can do to improve. So starting to encourage their relationship with failure as being something good. And if your children play things like sports, that's a great analogy. Do you remember when you started playing football? You sometimes wouldn't get the ball into the net straight away. You had to, like Siobhan said, the 3 Ps, you had to practice, practice, practice to get better at that game. Well, that's what failure is, right? You didn't get the ball into the net straight away, you failed, but you kept at it. You persevered and you practiced and you learned how to get better. That's what failure is. And so it's a good thing. But just this strategy alone, kind of debriefing with your child what worst case, best case, and most likely situation is, can really help to bring some logic to the situation. And when they realize that the most likely situation might actually be pretty manageable, that can help to potentially de-escalate the situation as well. So that's kind of just the easy strategy in the heat of the moment that you can use.
And just to add to that, Anne-Marie, really quickly, like if a parent's wondering, well, when do I implement this sort of thing? Like if you recognize that your kid is sort of what ifing a lot, right? Like, what if this happens, and they've gone down this whole road of like a cascade of worst case scenarios, because, as I highlighted earlier, we're very good at being catastrophic and thinking negative and unhelpful, right? And so it's best. So, as I was mentioning earlier, worry can be productive. And so we want to worry and focus on one event at a time, not everything that can snowball after the fact. And also looking at what's within the person's control, right?
Yeah.
If we're worrying about things that are outside of our control, that's not really helpful or productive. And also, looking at, are we, again, looking for the perfect solution, or are we okay with an imperfect solution? Are ways that we know we're worrying productively versus unproductive worry.
Exactly. All right. And so we talked about parents and schools. So we're going to look at what about therapy, when therapy maybe is a potential benefit. So we talked about some of the strategies we use today or we discussed come from CBT, right? Come from cognitive behavioral therapy. But there's an alternate treatment which is offered at the Wellness Center called SPACE. So I wonder if, Siobhan, you could share a little bit with us about that and some of the strategies and how it supports families.
Sure. You did a really nice job touching on some of the stuff earlier, and I like the fact that both, Lynn and yourself highlighted this importance of validation, right? So SPACE essentially stands for Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions. And as Anne-Marie highlighted earlier, it was developed by Dr. Eli Leibowitz. And so it's an evidence-based treatment, which means that a lot of research has gone into it and it seemed to be as, effective as CBT, a long-standing treatment approach for anxiety disorders. And so the difference between this treatment approach and CBT is that this doesn't really involve the child. It's more about the parent and helping the parent to change their behaviors and not expecting the child to be the one to change. So it's very much a parent-based treatment approach, even though the child is still the client. And so, it's very helpful if, kids are, reluctant to want to engage in therapy. It helps to empower the parents to, take the lead in helping their child cope with their anxiety. And it also is effective if, CBT hasn't helped to reduce the child's or teen's symptoms of anxiety. And so ultimately, the goals of SPACE is to basically help the child or teen be able to deal with stressful and distressing emotions, and also help the child or teen to be able to tolerate anxiety symptoms, and also to reduce parental accommodation. So Anne-Marie sort of touched on the term earlier. And so just to sort of explain, parental accommodation are any behaviors or the lack thereof that we do to reduce our child's anxiety, right? So, if the child is scared of the dark, you get them a night light, or you leave the hallway light on. Or if the child is anxious ordering food in a restaurant, a sibling does it for the child, or the parent does it for the child, or you avoid going somewhere or doing something because the child has anxiety. So this whole family system gets developed around this anxious child, right? And so the idea is being able to reduce that accommodation. And I also want to highlight there's a difference between accommodation and protective parenting, right? So when we're accommodating, it's in response to anxiety. But when a parent is, being protective, that's in response to fear and something, the child is in danger and you need to protect the child from that danger. So, and that's adaptive. Whereas when we do parental accommodation, that's maladaptive because it's not helping the child cope with their anxiety. And so SPACE is about the parent being more supportive, right? And validating, acknowledging the fact that the child or teen is experiencing anxiety, and being, expressing confidence in that, the child has the ability to cope with the anxiety. Just like a kid learning to ride a bike, right? You express confidence that, yeah, you might fall off, you get scratched, but I know that you're going to master this and you're going to be able to ride without your training wheels soon enough. And so that is what supportive parenting is about when it comes to the SPACE program. And so it's something that our director is licensed or certified in providing. And so, I think it's a good treatment approach, especially because it's, helping the parent to be more empowered in getting involved in their child's treatment and management of anxiety.
All right, thank you for that, Siobhan. That was really helpful. So I thought I'd share one of the questions from Q&A. My daughter tends to bite her nails and skin off the fingertips to the point that she's peeling off her fingerprint. I'm very worried that she's going through some kind of severe anxiety. I talk with her. I feel that she tells me everything, and I do my very best to help her find solutions that suit her personality. However, she is still biting at her fingertips. How can I tell the difference between my child having anxiety, being stressed, or it's just a bad habit?
Very good question.
Yes.
I think that sort of piggybacks onto what Lynn was saying earlier, and recognizing that you're not in this alone. And I don't, expect the parent to try to figure out, is it stress? Is it anxiety? Is it this? Is it that? But, being able to, go into, therapy and have that intake session with a clinician, and expressing those concerns, and the clinician asking the relevant questions. And then that would follow up with a visit with, your daughter, and getting, little questionnaires done to be able to have a more definitive answer on what's going on exactly. What we do know is it's a maladaptive coping strategy, right? And so it's being able to help your daughter, figure out more adaptive ways of coping with whatever it is that she's experiencing. So you're not alone. I would advise that you, seek out either, us, the wellness center, or the counseling center, or whatever, therapy entity of your choice, and, seek some therapeutic support.
Thank you for that, Siobhan. Thank you. So we hope that's helpful. We're coming to the end, and I wanted to just share a little bit more about the Family Resource Center and some of the other potentially supportive programming that we offer. It could potentially be suitable for you and your child who might be experiencing anxiety. So a great thing is we do have an anxiety workshop coming up very soon. We're hoping to pilot it in June or in the summer. So coming really soon. So feel free to email us at frc@gov.ky if that is something you have interest in and you want to be put on our waiting list. And you can let us know if you'd prefer to do it over Zoom or in person. We're going to be as accommodating as we can be, but we'd be interested to know where people were at in that kind of way, if it was Zoom or in person they prefer. We also offer emotion coaching. This is coming from the Gottman Institute, and we currently deliver it one-to-one with the parent, and it's just 6 sessions. And we aim to ensure that the parent has an understanding of the 5 main steps of emotion coaching so that they can support their child in the moment. And that could be anxiety, but it focuses on all emotions or an emotion coaching. We also offer SNAP program, which is a comprehensive program for boys and girls between the ages of 6 to 11, as well as their parents. And so it's for children experiencing significant behavioral issues at home or at school or in the community. And so sometimes we think anger and aggression or aggressive behaviors are separate from anxiety, but sometimes anxiety is at the core. So that could be something that's of benefit to your child. And I'd like to open up the floor to Lynn and to Siobhan to share a little bit about services that parents might find helpful.
Do you want me to go first? I can go first.
Go for it, Lynn.
Okay, so Inclusion Cayman is a nonprofit. We support the inclusion of individuals with disabilities, specifically in accessing an inclusive life. So that, is reflective of parental choice in choosing an inclusive life, or an individual with a disability choosing an inclusive life. So that includes mainstream education, recreation opportunities that people without disabilities regularly access, paid employment opportunities. So, we do a lot of work within multidisciplinary teams, and, I just want to share that we don't actually provide therapeutic supports or any interventions. So, Family Resource Center, Counseling Center, and the Wellness Center would be the best places to go to for those things, because we wouldn't be able to provide that to you. However, we do really, explore these things with families and think about, the supports and strategies that can be used at home or, in school for individuals with disabilities. We do a lot of advocacy work with families. So, we talked a little bit earlier about how to collaborate and have a solution-based lens with schools, and we support families in navigating that and learning how to do that. So we do lots of things, but with children with disabilities specifically.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
And so for the Wellness Center, we provide clinical services, and that can come in the form of individual therapy, play therapy, as well as the SPACE program. So that's what our director, Shannon Seymour, is certified in providing. And so, when it comes to play therapy, that's helpful too, because if it's a younger child that's not able to articulate themselves very well, then that can be expressed through their play and interventions done that way. So yeah, so it's individual family services, and each clinician, sort of utilizes a different therapeutic approach. CBT is also something that we utilize as well. Probably, more effective for older kids because they have that cognitive ability than trying to ask a, younger child with a very concrete mind to think very abstractly.
Very true. And I just wanted to add as well, if you were, weren't sure about about accessing the Wellness Center or somewhere else, you can start with a Family Resource Center. We typically refer out, we'll give you the contact details and things like that, and support you in another way that might be supportive for you. So you can start, this could be a starting point just to get some more information, or to get individual services from us. But we typically do support you in that way if there is another service we think would be more appropriate for you and your family. All right. So we're going to end there. Some of the resources we used today and that I used, Lynn and Siobhan, were guest panelists this evening. And so we're coming to the end. Just to say thank you, parents, for being there. We do know how difficult it can be to sometimes even to just be here in the virtual world. We have things to do and to prepare our children for school and things like that the next day. So thank you so much for your time and for being with us today.
Anne-Marie, I'm just going to put in the details for Inclusion Cayman in the chat.
Perfect.
Kind of the name. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram, but I'll put in our phone number and our info at email so people can contact us if they wish to.
Wonderful. And I'll ask Siobhan if you don't mind doing the same. That would be great. So then people can just copy and paste. That would be wonderful.
We're also on the forums of social media, Instagram, Facebook.
I think everyone is these days, right? Everyone is. Yeah.
And I'm having a question about, are these services available in the BRAC? So for the Family Resource Center, we do have one of our colleagues go over to the BRAC regularly throughout the month to provide services there to clients. And I want to say yes, for the Wellness Center, there is a BRAC office, correct?
We do have a BRAC office. Prior to COVID, I actually used to travel to the BRAC on a weekly basis to provide face-to-face therapeutic services. I haven't gone face-to-face in a while, but the option of Zoom sessions is always available. And we do have sometimes that a client may fly up for therapy if they want face-to-face sessions. So, if you're in the BRAC, you're not exempt. We provide services across the Cayman Islands. So you're still definitely able to get that support.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to invite those that are still here. You go ahead and copy and paste the information that Lynn and Siobhan are putting in the chat if you'd like it. But Google Inclusion Cayman or Google the Wellness Center and you will find the websites, you will find their Facebooks and their Instagrams as well to stay up to date with what's going on, as well as with us. We are on Facebook and Instagram and regularly update what's going on. And we're always doing things, I feel like. So Facebook, following us on Facebook and Instagram is the best way.
Sorry, I just sent it to all panelists, not all panelists and attendees, so I had to resend it just now. So I think, Siobhan, also you did the same thing. So just before we close, I want to ensure that people have access. There we go. We have it all
Okay.
now.
Wonderful. Thank you, ladies.
Yeah, perfect.
You're most welcome.
Great.
Okay, just doing a final review of the chat. All right. All right, thank you, everyone. And take care. And thank you again to Lynn and Siobhan for joining us and for all the valuable information. We hope it was helpful to the persons and parents attending this evening.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having us too.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending.
Yeah. Hope you have a good evening. Take care.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.